The other day, I had a comment on the channel and someone said they didn't know exactly what it means when someone says, hey, just listen to the fish. This is a term that you hear a lot of professional anglers, a lot of guys like myself throw out from time to time. And listening to the fish can truly help you to become a better angler, truly help you to get on a pattern a lot quicker. But if you are a little bit newer to fishing, it may be a little bit confusing when someone says, listen to the fish. And in this video, I want to give you a couple of examples of when I listened to the fish and it really helped to turn my day around. It really helped me to go from not catching a lot of fish to actually catching a lot of fish. And I'm gonna break it down for you. Now, before we get into the video, this one is brought to you by my apparel company and more particularly the fin fishing rod glove. This has been a really, really big hit. Guys, if you wanna help not only protect your rods, but also keep your rods kind of organized, as well as not have lures constantly get hung up in your rod gloves, I am highly gonna suggest the neoprene rod gloves that I have at Fin Fishing. I have a number of different colors for both spinning rods and bait casting rods. I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description as well as the comments. The best way to help support this channel is shopping at Fin Fishing, and one of the best products I have right now is the rod glove. Now, let's talk about listening to the fish. Like I said, this is a term that is thrown out a lot out there is, hey, I listened to the fish and it turned my day around. And so I haven't really seen a video talking about this specifically, even though I kind of mention it from time to time. But guys, listening to the fish obviously isn't an audible thing. It's not like bass are talking to you, but there's a lot of things that happen out there on the water that you should just pay attention to that can really help turn your day around. For example, I'm going to tell you of 2 or 3 different things that have happened to me over just the course of me fishing that really turned my day around. Now, the first one was a number of years ago. I was fishing a tournament and I actually practiced for this particular tournament, and I was throwing a lot of moving baits, covering a lot of water. And what I found in the practice period of this particular tournament is that I wasn't really getting bit on those moving baits. But as soon as I started slowing down, I started getting bit, okay? So this is one example of listening to the fish, is that if you're not getting bit on a lot of moving baits or covering a lot of water, those fish just may be in one of those moods where you need to hit them on the head. And so it's really important to listen to the fish, pay attention to what the fish are telling you. Now, interestingly enough, on the very tournament day, things completely switched. I started out my day flipping and pitching, slowing down in some of these areas where I had caught some fish. And when I was actually reeling up my bait, which was a soft plastic crawl, I had a fish following this bait and it attacked it right at the boat. And so I realized right then and there that the fish actually completely flipped. They went from wanting something very, very slow to actually wanting something horizontally coming through the water column and coming really fast. So I actually switched over to a moving lure. In this case, I switched over to a square bill and I started catching a ton of fish. And this was just a matter of a day. And that was something, like I said, that was something that I saw, I witnessed, and that is what we call listening to the fish, because I realized the fish didn't want this bait when it was sitting down there on the bottom, when I was slowly working it on the bottom. But as soon as I started reeling it away, it triggered that fish to hitting that bait. That is what we call listening to the fish. And this happens in a number of different ways. Another example of this was, guys, and a lot of the examples I'm going to give you are when I fish tournaments, but this is not a tournament thing. This is just when you're out there fishing. And another thing that happened to me a number of years ago, I was fishing a tournament in New York, actually on Lake Oneida. And both me and the co-angler that I was fishing with me that day, we were throwing jerk baits. I'd kind of got on a jerk bait pattern. Now, when I was catching fish on a jerk bait in the practice period, it was very cloudy conditions, and I was throwing a jerk bait that was opaque, meaning that you couldn't see through it. It was a perch colored pattern, and so it was kind of bright, and the fish seemed to really be liking that. I was catching a lot of fish. Now, Flip on to the actual tournament day. Both me and my co-angler are fishing these particular jerkbaits, and the water is really, really clear. The only difference is during that tournament, there was sunny conditions out, and I didn't make the change. And the thing was I was catching a few fish, but what I was noticing was that I was getting a lot of fish hooked on the back hook or hooked on the outside of the face. But my co-angler, he was fishing a clear bait. He was fishing a translucent bait, a bait that the fish could see through. And he was actually catching a couple more fish than I was this day. And I realized that every fish that he caught, they had that jerkbait in their mouth, T-boned in their mouth. And so again, in that moment, I realized that, hey, I'm fishing a lot different conditions than I was in practice. I went from cloudy conditions to sunny conditions where the fish could see a lot better. And even though I was catching a few fish on my jerkbait, they just weren't getting it as good as they were getting my co-angler's jerkbait, who was fishing that more translucent pattern. And the thing is that sometimes fish can see your bait too well. And if they see your bait too well, especially at last minute, they will just swipe at that bait. And that was what was happening with my jerkbait, where the fish that were hitting his jerkbait, they were eating it. So once I kind of started to realize, hey, you know, these fish are getting his bait a lot better, I switched over to actually a perch pattern that was more translucent. You could see through it. Bam, automatic difference. Those fish were getting that bait a lot better. I actually had lost a few fish earlier in the day. I stopped losing fish. That again is a prime example of listening to the fish, because in that very moment I realized, hey, something's up. I need to make a change. Okay, so those are big differences. Now here's another big difference, and it actually happened with a jerkbait as well. But I was fishing a lake down in South Carolina, excuse me. This was Lake Hartwell. And I had been fishing a jerkbait a lot and catching some fish on a jerkbait. And my jerkbait seemed to be kind of dying, but I made this long bomb cast. This was a complete accident. I made this long bomb cast, guess what? Got a little bit of a backlash. And my jerkbait landed on the surface of the water. And while it was on the surface of the water, bam, a bass came up there and hit that bait. And I realized that maybe these fish actually wanted a topwater bait, right? Because my jerkbait was sitting there on top. He came up and hit it. I switched over to topwater bait, and it seemed like I got double the amount of bites. Why? Because I listened to the fish. I listened to what that fish was telling me, even though, again, this is not an audible thing. It's just realizing what is happening out there in the water. And this, guys, this is something that doesn't only happen with your lures, but it can happen with, you know, the cover, for example, that you are fishing. A while back, I was fishing the James River down in Virginia. And I was fishing a lot of lily pads in this particular event. It was another tournament, and I was catching a lot of fish in lily pads. But during the actual tournament day, in the areas that I had found, the water got really high in these areas because it's a tidal river. The water was really high. We were on a high period, and I could not get bit out of lily pads. And not get bit out of lily pads at all. And as I was kind of going through the lily pads, there was a cypress tree that was a little bit shallower water. And I kind of just decided to make a long bomb cast at this cypress tree, even though I hadn't really caught a lot of fish on cypress trees leading up to this moment. A fish actually picked that up. I caught the fish, and I realized because that water was high, a lot of those fish had moved out of those lily pads and they had started to set up on cypress trees, completely opposite of the way that I had been catching them. But I was not used to tidal water fisheries. This was the first time I had ever fished a tidal water fishery in my life. And I realized that the fish literally had made a quick movement. They had gone from the pads to the cypress trees. I spent the rest of the day fishing cypress trees and caught a ton of fish. And it was, again, it was a difference. It was a big thing. It was listening to the fish. So guys, I just wanted to give you a couple examples of things that have happened to me on the water. I would love to hear your examples, things when you have listened to the bass and it turned your day around. Leave those down below in the comments. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and maybe you'll like this video right here. Also, you can click right here to support the channel at Finn Fishing. I will see you guys tomorrow.